The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by Microbiome, now offering its new cardio health product with 500 milligrams of cocoa flavonols. This 100% pure Cocoa Pro cocoa extract formulation is backed by 20-plus years of research on cocoa flavonols.
Cocoa flavonols increase the body's output of nitric oxide to improve endothelial function, which results in enhanced blood vessel flexibility and better blood flow. More information at cocovia.com.
The pandemic has made us more aware of our immune systems. How does our diet impact our overall immunity? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
70% of our immune cells are located in or around our digestive tracts. The microbes in our intestines are in constant communication with these essential cellular defenses.
How can we bolster our microbiome so there's a healthy diversity of bacteria? Why is a plant-based diet preferable?
Intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating helps our microbes adapt. How do these organisms respond to fermented foods in the diet?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, how your microbiome shapes your immune response.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, many of the early public health pronouncements and policies regarding the spread of the coronavirus turned out to be wrong. In particular, the belief that large droplets were primarily responsible for viral transmission led to a false sense of security. People were told that if they maintained 6 feet of separation from others, they would be safe. Plexiglass barriers sprang up in pharmacies, grocery stores, restaurants, schools, and offices. We now know that SARS-CoV-2 can spread through microscopic aerosols as well as large droplets. Imagine smoke wafting through a room. That may be a better way to comprehend how the coronavirus moves. Plastic barriers may actually interfere with good ventilation and permit viral particles to collect in some areas. Good ventilation, high-efficiency particulate air filters, and effective face masks can reduce the amount of virus people inhale.
The controversy about masking has obscured a more fundamental question. How well do masks protect against airborne particles containing the coronavirus? A study published in the journal Physics of Fluids attempted to answer that very concern. Scientists simulated human breathing with mannequins used to train students in CPR. They compared different types of face masks, including surgical masks, those made of cloth, and those rated N95 or KN95. Neither cloth masks nor surgical masks were very effective for blocking exhaled particles. The problem seems to be that there are gaps around the edges of both surgical and cloth masks, especially at the bridge of the nose, but also at the cheeks and lower jaw. N95 and KN95 are designed to fit the face more snugly. Their filtration efficiency was much better, but not perfect. If people are going to be indoors with other people, they should probably be wearing the most protective masks available.
Some airlines are now mandating higher quality face masks for passengers. The German airline Lufthansa is preventing passengers from using bandanas, gaiters, scarves, cloth face masks, and masks with valves. Finnair and Air France are also banning cloth masks or those with exhalation valves. Some American airlines are also instituting more rigorous mask requirements, but most have not yet banned cloth face masks.
You may have heard that nuts are good for your heart, but which nuts and how many? Scientists in Georgia conducted a 2-month study comparing diets with and without a modest daily serving of pecans. The 56 volunteers for this trial were overweight or had elevated blood lipids. One group followed their usual diet. A second group added 68 grams of pecans to their daily diet. Finally, a third group substituted the 68 grams of pecans for something else with the same number of calories. The researchers measured blood glucose and lipids at the beginning and end of the trial period. Participants consuming pecans had significantly lower levels of cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides, and apolipoprotein B. Those in the control group had no significant changes in their blood lipids.
Scientists have established that people who eat lots of vegetables and fruits tend to have lower blood pressure. Now researchers can tell us why. The plant compounds called flavonoids encourage the development of healthy gut microbes. These microscopic inhabitants of the digestive tract are responsible for breaking down the flavonoids in the foods we eat. The metabolites they produce have cardioprotective effects in our bodies. Scientists studied more than 900 adults in northern Germany. People with more parabacteroides in their microbiome had higher systolic blood pressure. Those consuming the most flavonoids in foods like berries, apples, pears, and red wine had the greatest diversity of gut microbiota and lower systolic blood pressure. Approximately 15% of the blood pressure benefit from a high flavonoid diet is explained by the participants' gut microbiome. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Most of us take our digestion for granted. We don't think about our intestinal microbiota. In fact, we'd probably prefer not to think about the billions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that hang out in our colons. And yet, they have a profound impact on our health.
Today, we're talking about the microbiome with Dr. Emran Meyer. He is the executive director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience and the director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. His first book was The Mind-Gut Connection. Dr. Meyer's new book is The Gut-Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Emran Meyer.
Thanks, Terry and Joe. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Dr. Meyer, you were in medical school in the 70s, and there were a lot of promises. I was in graduate school in the late 60s and early 70s, and in the field of neuropharmacology that I was interested in, there were also a lot of promises. You thought that you would be able to eradicate things like peptic ulcer disease, GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, inflammatory bowel disease. What happened? We didn't cure them.
Yeah, I would say, there's two sides to this question. I mean, on the one side, obviously, medicine has made tremendous progress during that time. Also like the accomplishments in surgery, transplantation. So, I mean, there have been wonderful things, the ability that we can develop vaccines. On the other hand, the chronic diseases, the progress in medicine has been much slower than anticipated. Yes, we have learned to control or minimize the impact of peptic ulcer disease, which was a big disease when I was in medical school. But then there's other things like inflammatory bowel disease you mentioned that have actually keep increasing, not just in the US, but also in developing countries. There's depression. There's new disease, like all the metabolic diseases, which keep increasing. So, and it seems like, other than making recommendations for a healthier lifestyle, medicine has not really come up with something that would eradicate or tackle these problems at their root. Medicine has come up with lots of medications that deal with they keep us from dying, and it's a huge bonus for the pharmaceutical industry to have these and sell these medications for high blood pressure, hypercholesterolemia. But we've not really made any significant progress in getting rid of these diseases or preventing them from developing. I mean, we have things happening, for example, that, the colon cancer, occurs in young and younger age populations. I mean, that's kind of a very strange phenomenon, considering that, the war on cancer was declared decades ago. And we're seeing that it's actually changing in a way, in an unexpected way. So I would say, yes, medicine has made unanticipated progress in some areas. And on the other hand, it's really sad to see that, it has failed to deal with what is now what I've called a chronic non-infectious disease epidemic.
Well, one of the advances that we have seen in medical research over the last 10 or 20 years has been a new appreciation of the importance of all of the microbes that we host, especially in the gastrointestinal tract, but not only in the gastrointestinal tract. We're talking with you today about your brand new book, The Gut Immune Connection, and you really begin the book with a description of the gut-brain connection. Doesn't seem that obvious. Can you tell us a bit more about it and how it evolved?
Yeah, it doesn't seem that obvious that, these trillions of invisible microorganisms that live in the darkness and the oxygen-free compartment of our body would be able to communicate with the most sophisticated, computer, definitely on the planet, possibly in the universe, our brain. But there's several reasons to see the evolutionary path to that. I mean, one is the first animals in the ocean, first marine animals, were essentially floating digestive tubes, tiny little creatures that had a nerve net wrapped around them. And that nerve net enabled them both to move, so propulsion, but also to have a peristaltic activity, so move food from one opening to the other opening for excretion. So in evolution, this was a very close connection between the digestion and our first nervous system. So there's always been this excitement about our second brain in the gut. This best-selling book decades ago. In reality, that nervous system in our gut was really the first nervous system, and we have to assume that over millions of years, there has been lateral gene transfer from some of these original cells that played a role here with the nerve cells. And what makes this even more intriguing is that at some point, some microbes from the surrounding ocean made it inside of that digestive tube, and evolution realized the advantage of being there by having a constant flow of nutrition, being protected from the environment, and having a free ride to different locations. That this concept that we have microbes in our gut has persisted ever since, and in pretty much every gastrointestinal tract of any creature on Earth has maintained that. And what I mentioned about this lateral gene transfer, so the microbes have a lot more genes accumulated in their genome than mammals and humans. So millions of genes, most of them we don't know what they do. And there almost certainly has been this lateral gene transfer from the microbes onto the nerve cells, that primitive nervous system. And that's really the explanation why many of the substances, the neuroactive substances that we can detect today from these microbes are very similar to our own neurotransmitters. And same is true about the receptors. So these chemicals produced by the microbes fit perfectly on receptors in our gut and our nerves. And ultimately, when in evolution, animals developed a head, a polar structure, the same blueprints for these neurotransmitters were transferred into the central nervous system. So now we have basically a shared communication, a shared language in the nervous system that reaches really from the microbes and their ancient experience and communication that goes back billions of years to our brain, ultimately playing a role in our thoughts and emotions. It's kind of hard to believe that, but it's,
And then we end up with something like serotonin, which was first identified as a neurotransmitter in the brain, in the central nervous system. And then we discover that, oh man, there's a lot of it operating in the gastrointestinal tract as well.
Yes, serotonin is a very good example because we know a lot about it. So serotonin is a metabolite of the essential amino acid tryptophan. And serotonin is produced in specialized cells in the gut, the enterochromaffin cells. These cells take up tryptophan and they have a rate-limiting enzyme that converts it into serotonin. Now, the microbes come into play because they play a major role in stimulating this enzyme. So essentially, they control about 40% of the production of the serotonin, which is, again, sort of an amazing idea that these creatures that we don't see and that they would have such a major impact on a neurotransmitter that plays a role both in the gut, it's a major regulator of our peristalsis and therefore digestion and secretion, but also signals via the vagus nerve to the brain, to emotional and homeostatic centers within the brain.
Now, I think, Dr. Meyer, that a lot of our listeners have heard of serotonin in large measure because of a drug called Prozac and its relatives, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what happens if those bugs in our belly, if those bacteria aren't doing their job correctly and our serotonin levels aren't optimal?
Yeah, so there's two parts of the answer. Both of them are pretty intriguing. So first of all, we don't know for sure in humans and in depression, what relative in percentage points, what role do the microbes play in the way that we feel as humans? There's lots of animal experiments that have shown an effect on emotion-like behavior in mice and zebrafish. But in humans, that ultimately the answer to the question is not there. But what's intriguing is microbes also have a molecule very similar to our serotonin transporter on nerve cells and platelets that these serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac inhibit. So when somebody takes a Prozac, we not only affect our own nerves and serotonin metabolism, but also the one that the microbes play a big role in. So again, we don't know exactly what role this plays in the effectiveness of some of these medications.
You're listening to Dr. Amron Meyer, Executive Director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience, and the Director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. Dr. Meyer is the author of The Gut-Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
After the break, we'll find out how soil health, environmental health, and planetary health are linked through the One Health concept.
What is the role of diet in these interconnections?
Lots of Americans eat a diet loaded with refined grains as well as meat. How does that affect our immune response in a time of COVID?
Gastroenterologists talk about intestinal permeability. Ordinary people call it leaky gut. What is it, and why is it important?
How can we reduce leaky gut and restore our microbiome to a healthier condition?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This podcast is brought to you by Verazana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to illness. Online at Verazana.com. That's Verizana.com/health-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50. That's PEOPLE 50. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. Kaya Biotics.com.
Also by CocoVia, now offering its Cardio Health Powder with 500 milligrams of cocoa flavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
Today our topic is how our intestinal microbes interact with the rest of our body. Our guest has just described the strong connection between the gut and the brain. It turns out that our microbiota also have an impact on our immune response. Perhaps we should be paying close attention to that when the world is suffering through a pandemic.
We are talking with Dr. Amron Meyer, Executive Director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience. He's also the director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. His research has been supported by the National Institutes of Health for the past 25 years, and he's considered a pioneer and world leader in the area of brain-gut microbiome interactions. Dr. Meyer is the author of The Mind-Gut Connection, How the Hidden Conversation Within Our Bodies Impacts Our Mood, Our Choices, and Our Overall Health. Dr. Meyer's new book is The Gut Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
Dr. Meyer, would you please tell us about your beginnings? We understand you were born in a small town in Bavaria. Your family had run a confectionery business for generations since 1873. And I guess they kind of hoped or maybe even assumed that you would run the business someday. What led you to a different path?
Yeah, this is obviously, I could tell you a long story about this. I mean, this was a struggle.
Yes.
This was a struggle till the very end when I applied to medical school. It was influenced to a large degree. I mean, I've always been curious about science, but I also liked the business part. I worked in this business as a student, making money for myself. And so this was a real struggle to decide ultimately, is it the science or is it the business path I would take? Another interesting aspect of this is, growing up in this business in the house with the bakery and all this chocolate factory, I was exposed to enormous amounts of unhealthy food, i.e. sugar. And when I think back today, we know sugar is a really bad thing for our health, and it plays a big role in the dysbiosis, the unhealthy composition of our microbiome. So the fact that I did not come down with all kinds of diseases, chronic diseases, metabolic disease, diabetes, is sort of in some ways, it's kind of a miracle when I think about this. And but there were other things at the time in terms of lifestyle that played, I think, in my opinion, a big compensatory role. Lots of physical exercise in the Bavarian mountains. There was not a weekend not hiking and climbing, and in the winter skiing and practicing in the gym for these activities. So, we know that exercise also affects the gut microbes. And I think the combination of a very unhealthy diet at the time with a very healthy lifestyle otherwise, made a difference. And I think that's important when we think about this today. Diet is a big thing, but it's not the only thing.
Dr. Meyer, you have a key philosophy underlying the gut immune condition, and it's the interconnectedness of food, gut health, plant and soil health. And I want to know more about soil health and why that's important, but also planetary health. And you make the case for the One Health concept that encompasses all these dimensions. So I'd really like to get a sense of how Is human health directly connected to the environment and more particularly to the microbiome and also the role of diet in this interconnectedness?
Yeah, so the argument I've made with this term, I mean, I didn't invent the term One Health, but I've adapted it and sort of expanded it from its original definition, which was mainly on human and animal health. So when we think about it, I think there's no question that gut health and the gut plays a central role in our overall health, brain health, and I make a big, expand this in my book. Gut health is closely connected with gut microbial health and diversity and relative abundances. And those microbial ecosystem properties and health, again, are heavily influenced by what we eat, the diet. It's pretty clear that the more diverse our diet is, particularly from plant-based sources, the more diverse, greater diversity and richness we have in our microbes, and the better that is for the gut, decreasing inflammatory components of our physiology. And so if you look at how do we get the most diverse, largely plant-based food into our microbes, well, we have to grow these foods in the soil. And one of the most remarkable things writing this book and looking at this literature and the research is, so the soil microbes interact with the root system of plants, of all the plants, and play a major role in regulating the synthesis, production of molecules that the plants use for like their own pharmacy. So that's the plant's pharmacy, the polyphenols, or, they have previously been known under antioxidants, but that's just a small part of their function. They are the medicine and the protective mechanisms for the plants. So if the soil microbes are compromised, decreased diversity, diminished by chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, then the plants will have a greatly diminished reservoir of these health-promoting molecules. And that's important for us because when we eat the plants, these are very large molecules, these polyphenols. They're not just absorbed in our gut, they go down to our own microbes now. And our own microbes, they're both food for these microbes, they increase their diversity, but they're also broken down into smaller molecules by the microbes, which are then absorbed and exert a multiple health benefits for us. So now we have the link between the soil health, plant health, gut microbial health, gut health, our own health. And if we sort of expand this even further with the kind of diet, what's called the standard American diet, which is heavily reliant on red meat consumption and animal products, here's where the planetary health comes in. To produce this type of diet, to generate this, takes a major toll on planetary health because we have to cut down, the Amazon forest. In South Asia, the forests have more room for monocultures of soybeans to feed these cows, which is actually not a healthy diet for them either. And these animals produce methane, a major contributor to greenhouse gases, and at the same time, this high red meat consumption and and animal fat consumption has a negative effect on our own health. So you can really, it's kind of an amazing connection that this concept of interconnectedness, planetary interconnectedness, has sort of been in my brain for a long time, even in college, where I was interested in Buddhist concepts and philosophy, that this really now comes up in terms of science and in terms of what is the optimal way for a healthy diet and for optimal human health. It is we have to be aware and mindful of this interconnectedness that is not just good for us, but it's good for everything else around us on this planet.
Dr. Meyer, I'd really like to ask you about one of those connections, and it's at the heart of your book, the gut-immune connection. So if we have a lot of Americans eating a standard American diet that's full of refined grains, wheat and corn, and oils derived from corn, for example, and meat. We have a lot of people whose ecology in their digestive tract may not be in the best of shape. How does that affect our immune system? Question 1. And question 2, does that have any impact on a situation that we have seen over the last year and a half of COVID?
Yeah, let me answer the first question first. So there's a very close, so going back into the gut, into the darkness of our gut, and if you could see it, the microbes are microns away from the biggest part of our immune system. So about 60-70% of our immune cells are located in the gut, just underneath the surface. And there's a very elaborate, natural engineering mechanism that keeps the distance, keeps these microbes away from these immune cells, because immune cells will always react when they encounter any kind of microbe, be it a pathogen or being a benign beneficial microbe. And there's a layer in our gut. There's a mucus layer, complex mucus layer made up of complex carbohydrates, sugar molecules. And there's also what we call an epithelial barrier, a layer of gut cells that are very tightly connected. So the combination of those two layers, the mucus layer and the epithelial layer, form this barrier that separate all our microbes on the one side from all the immune cells on the other side. If that barrier is compromised, then there's this contact, and that leads to initially, a mild, low-grade immune activation in the gut, which then produces inflammatory molecules, cytokines, which make that gut even leakier. And a vicious cycle comes into place that now entire microbes can penetrate through the gut wall, get into the gut-based immune system, and ultimately get into the circulation. And there's receptors for molecules made up of the cell wall of microbes, so-called toll-like receptors. So these receptors are everywhere in our body, including the liver and in our brain. And when these microbes and their cell walls come in contact with them, they will trigger this low-grade immune activation. So you could say that probably about 40% of the population in the US, which have not an ideal metabolic homeostatic system, will have this low-grade immune activation with all its consequences.
Now, Dr. Meyer, I have to tell you that several years ago, I was meeting with a group of very smart physicians. There was a neurologist, there was a family medicine physician, there was a pediatrician, there were a whole bunch of really smart guys. And the word leaky gut came up, and they started laughing, making fun of it. Like, oh, what nonsense. I never learned about leaky gut in medical school. What are you talking about? Not all of your colleagues seemingly accept the concept of this leaky gut inflammatory process. Can you clarify, and why haven't more of your colleagues embraced this approach?
Well, I have to be honest, I was one of those physicians that laughed about this when my patients first told me about it. And, patients knew about this from their functional medicine practitioner. I do not know how the functional medicine community came up with that concept without any science behind it in the first place. In the meantime, even in scientific papers, in, Nature reviews, you will find that term, leaky gut. And it's, I always hate to sort of come up with a simplistic explanation that explains just about everything, of our chronic diseases. But it does play a central role, in many of our diseases. And why this is still not fully accepted, I think it's still not taught in many medical school classes. So the lay public learned about this earlier, and non-medical practitioners learned about this much earlier and accepted it much earlier because it made a lot of sense to them. And there's one component to it, that microbes also can produce anti-inflammatory molecules that are kind of the gut's own mechanism to attenuate the damage from a leaky gut. So these short-chain fatty acids, butyrate that some microbes produce, would be like a medicine that tries to prevent this low-grade immune activation to take off and become systemic.
Well, what our listeners really want to understand is how to restore the gut to a more normal state. So, for example, we swallow, I can't even begin to count how many millions or billions of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which can be quite irritating to the digestive tract. And of course, our diets, as you've already pointed out, have an impact. So how do we, number one, reduce this leaky gut problem? And number two, perhaps even more importantly, how do we restore our gut microbiome?
So there's obviously multiple ways. They all fall under, I would say right now, under healthy lifestyle choices. There may be in the future, targeted interventions with genetically engineered microbes and all kinds of things. But at the moment, I would say it will focus on a healthy diet, on an optimal diet on the one side, on a calm mind, a mindful attitude. That's important because the brain also sends down signals to the gut, and negative emotions and severe stress will also contribute to a leaky gut. It is also moderate regular exercise, which again has a beneficial effect on that system. It seems that multiple systems, including the diet, all can have this positive effect on the gut permeability. Initially, there was some concern: can we really with diet, if you messed up your gut microbiome early on in life, if you got all these antibiotic doses, 5 doses by the age of 2, that compromised the development of a healthy microbiome. So the question initially was, can we actually fix this later? Well, we can't restore, we can't restore an optimal microbiome, but we can restore many of the damage that has been done. It's like in any natural ecosystem. You may not be able to bring back species that got extinct in this process, but you can bring back to life species that have been suppressed to very low numbers. Yeah, just like we do in natural ecosystem restoration,
You're listening to Dr. Emran Meyer, Executive Director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience, and the Director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. He's considered a pioneer and world leader in the area of brain-gut microbiome interactions. Dr. Meyer is the author of The Mind-Gut Connection. His new book is The Gut-Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
After the break, we'll talk more about the connection between our gut flora and our immune system's susceptibility to infections like COVID-19.
When it comes to diet, what should we be avoiding?
Is intermittent fasting helpful?
We'll get some more specifics on the benefits of a plant-based diet.
Also, how important is sleep? Does mindfulness have any impact on our immune response?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's KAYA Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, now offering its Cardio Health Powder with 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany, KAYA Biotics.com.
We Americans love to snack. We might have coffee and a bite of something between breakfast and lunch. And of course, the bedtime snack is legendary. Are there advantages to intermittent fasting?
Our guest is Dr. Amron Meyer, Executive Director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience and the Director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. Dr. Meyer is the author of The Mind-Gut Connection. His new book is The Gut-Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
Dr. Meyer, I am wondering if there is a connection between our gut flora, I guess it's fauna as well, all the microbes in our gut, and our immune system's susceptibility to infection like COVID. Have we seen any evidence on that?
Yeah, Terry, this is an excellent question. And there's obviously a lot of research going on to, clearly define the connection. But one thing that we know is just, we talked about a few minutes ago, because of the close interaction between the microbes and our immune system and the fact that 70% of our immune cells are in the gut and are programmed or influenced by gut microbial signals, it is obvious that some of the immune cells that end up in our lungs and defend us against the virus have been in the gut and have been interacting with the gut microbes. There's another piece of evidence that, individuals with what's been called in medicine comorbidities. So these are all these metabolic, these non-infectious chronic diseases, from hypertension to heart disease, hyperlipidemia, had a higher rate of infection, have more severe courses, ending up more in the ICU, and also having a higher rate of developing long COVID. So these are the individuals that we know have a compromised gut microbial ecosystem and less diversity, low-grade inflammation in the gut. So there's definitely a lot of pieces that you can put together and say, if you have an unhealthy gut microbiome, an unhealthy gut, a compromised barrier, you are more susceptible to an infectious disease that affects primarily the lungs. And that in the future, one aspect, one intervention to prevent the next, and then I'm sure we'll be seeing more epidemics coming down, the line. The one way to prevent this or attenuate it is by paying more attention to a healthy diet and lifestyle choices that are good for our gut microbes.
Dr. Meyer, I would really like you to get specific when it comes to the diet. What should we be eating? What should we be avoiding? And when should we be eating? Because I think there's now a lot more interest in timing and this concept of intermittent fasting. But first, what should we be eating? What are you eating?
Yeah, so, Joe, a very good question. So I came to this from being a carnivore and omnivore, and more with writing my books and also, looking at the research, really migrated gradually to a largely plant-based diet. I'm not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I do eat fish and seafood, occasionally free-range chicken. But the great majority of my diet and what I recommend to people, and this is not my philosophical view, it's really based on science, that largely our microbes are in optimal condition when they receive a large variety of different kinds of plant-based foods. And the answer is very simple. Plant-based foods have two components that we know now have a major beneficial effect for the microbes. One is the fiber content. So molecules, large molecules that cannot be absorbed in the small intestine. They have to be broken down because we don't have the enzymes in our human GI tract, and they're too large. So they move down into the end of the small intestine and into the colon, where the microbes reign. And for the microbes, these fiber molecules are exactly what they're looking for, because they metabolize these molecules into smaller molecules, which are, so I mentioned earlier, one that got a lot of attention, short chain fatty acids, or butyrate, which is this anti-inflammatory molecule that can act locally in the gut on certain immune cells, but it can also act in the circulation on other areas within the body, exerting this beneficial effect. And there's many more, what we call metabolites, breakdown products of this fiber that are neuroactive. They can act on the brain, they can act on the vagus nerve, can act on other immune cells. But then there's this other category in plants, which are the polyphenols. So these are, again, very large molecules. They cannot be absorbed in the small intestine, or just a very small degree, counter to what advertisement may tell you, that the best form, or the most absorbable antioxidant. That's just not the case. It's not how these molecules are built. They also go down to the microbes. The microbes use them both as food for their own growth and diversity, but also they turn them into health promoting smaller molecules, which are then going to get into our circulation. And so why would the diversity play a role? So it's not just if you eat tomatoes only, you're not going to have a healthy microbiome. Microbes are specialized to break down certain polyphenols or certain fiber molecules. So the greater the variety of these plant-based foods is, the more you need a diverse population of microbes, because each of them specialized on one aspect of this production. So that's, it's a very easy explanation. There shouldn't even be a discussion why this is not the optimal diet for your gut health. So I do emphasize, and you mentioned this, Joy, in your question, it's not just important what we eat, it's important where this food comes from. So we mentioned that before with the soil. And the third component is when do you eat it? And so there's been a lot of research over the last decades, really, in mouse models on various forms of fasting, intermittent fasting, which all have shown beneficial effects on the metabolic health and the longevity of these animal models. There's much fewer data on the human benefits. It's always the problem with all the microbiome studies. It's easy to show something in the mouse model or in a fruit fly or in a zebrafish. It's much more difficult to show the same beneficial effect in humans.
Consequently, we know more about keeping mice healthy than we know about keeping people healthy.
Yeah, so let me say something about intermittent fasting. I personally prefer the term time-restricted eating, which means you just leave your digestive system empty for 16 hours and you restrict the time that you eat and you feed your microbes to 8 hours. That has multiple benefits that have been shown, both on terms of when there's no food in your stomach, you have a different kind of peristalsis. You clean out your gut, you prevent the settlement of microbes in your small intestine, but also you put your body into a sort of transient state of ketosis. And then you come back during your feeding period with a diverse plant-based diet. So you can take advantage of both the benefits of a ketotic state, burning fat, and also feeding your microbes with a very diverse plant-based food. So I would say, and we've been practicing this ourselves, it's not that hard to do, restricting the time that you eat something to 8 hours a day, still a long time, long enough to get the pleasure out of food and not feeling hypoglycemic.
Dr. Meyer, I would still like to pin you down on your preferred plant-based diet. I mean, it's easy to say, well, eat a lot of stuff. So, yeah, eat some broccoli, eat some Brussels sprouts, eat some kale, eat some cabbage. But can you give us a little more specific information on like what your dinner plate would look like this evening?
So first of all, as I said, like all the food sources that you just mentioned are part of this. So in California, obviously, we have these available all year round. Many places in the world, they're seasonal. So whatever is available to you, it doesn't really, I don't pin it down on any particular food item. So we always have a salad that has at least 10 components. When my wife makes a vegetable dish, the same principle. It's not just one type of thing. It's not, sweet potatoes. It's a combination of onions and leeks and garlic and spices, which also have these polyphenols, like turmeric, for example, has these same molecules. Many spices have these molecules. So different spices, different vegetables, whatever is available. What you want to avoid is the starchy vegetables. So definitely you don't want the overdose on the baked potato or on French fries, because our food culture has kind of extracted most beneficial components out of our plant-based diet with making it, the white rice, the potatoes, the pasta. All of these components all of these foods used to contain the fiber and the polyphenols. Our food culture has eliminated or extracted them as much as possible and created food preferences that are not beneficial. So I would say it's the number of different components, whatever you can find in the market, that which exclusion of the starchy vegetables should be on your plate, mixtures of that. There's another component, the fermented foods. In a recent article that's showing actually that a variety of fermented foods can have an even more pronounced effect on gut microbial diversity and anti-inflammatory effects of the diet than only a largely plant-based diet. So I recommend this as well, not popping a probiotic pill, but enriching your diet with multiple fermented food items ranging from kombucha to sauerkraut, kimchi, depending on your taste preferences.
What about fermented dairy like yogurt?
Fermented dairy products definitely feed into this. There's different products ranging from kefir to different types of yogurts. Some yogurts enriched with additional probiotics, and there's some studies that have shown that is beneficial. So definitely, fermented dairy products should be part of this naturally fermented food component.
Well, it sounds like your plate is going to be colorful and delicious, because all those spices and different vegetables are going to have a lot of flavor. In addition to adopting that type of approach and eliminating ultra-processed foods, and especially sugar, how important is the mindfulness you mentioned, the exercise, and presumably sleep?
Yeah, coming back to the central role of the gut and this interaction of the microbes with the gut immune system. So you have to remember the gut has very close bidirectional connections with the brain, therefore with the mind. So anything that happens in the brain is reflected, has a mirror reflection in the gut. Negative emotions, particularly bad. We don't know as much about positive emotions, but we assume that has a positive effect on this gut microbial immune interaction. Regular exercise, again, has been shown to have beneficial effects on components of the gut microbiome, whereas extreme exercise, with like ultramarathon and triathlon, it's been shown to have the same negative effects on the gut as severe psychological stress or a very unhealthy diet. So it's not healthy, to stress your system with extreme exercise. It has no health benefits. It may get you a gold medal at the Olympics, but but it will not contribute to your overall well-being. And then the third thing is about sleep. So important interactions between sleep and the gut. This has been studied for a long time. We know a lot of things that, how REM sleep is reflected in particular patterns of gut activity. And we now also know that that has an effect on the microbial geography in the gut. So that means how close microbes are to the gut wall and therefore to the immune system, and how much they can induce gene expression in gut cells that then spread throughout the body. So we also know that poor sleep translates into this low-grade immune activation in the body. And so a healthy diet, production of copious amounts of these anti-inflammatory molecules, and good sleep all work together in this interconnected way to assure that you have this, the optimal regulation in your overall health. Clearly, it comes out to, and there's many epidemiological studies that have shown that these lifestyle factors are associated with increased healthy longevity, not just getting older, but being healthy when you get old, not having early cognitive decline. And we now believe and have evidence that what's underlying this in part is this healthy gut microbiome immune interaction in the gut that is associated with these healthy lifestyle choices.
Dr. Imran Meyer, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you, Terry and Joe. It was a real pleasure communicating with you and explaining some of the often complicating sounding connections between the brain, the gut, and the microbiome.
You've been listening to Dr. Imran Meyer, Executive Director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience, and the Director of the UCLA Microbiome Center. Dr. Meyer is the author of The Mind-Gut Connection, How the Hidden Conversation Within Our Bodies Impacts Our Mood, Our Choices, and Our Overall Health. His new book is The Gut Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio WUNC with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
And by CocoVia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA biotics.com.
You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website, peoplespharmacy.com, on Monday morning. You might want to share it with a friend.
To comment on the show, look for the post on our website, peoplespharmacy.com. It's show number 1270.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter and get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to our newsletter, you also have regular access to our weekly podcast and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.